Jayden Battey is a community leader whose life has been shaped by curiosity and a deep commitment to helping others. From living alongside and supporting people in community housing, to advocating for fairer systems at home and around the world, Jayden's story reminds us how important it is to show up for and support others. From the lands of the Wurundjeri people, this is Stories of Wonder. Jayden Battey, welcome to Stories of Wonder.
Thanks, Dom. It's really good to be here.
Well, it's lovely to have you. So you've been doing community-focused work since a very young age. How did that begin for you, and what drew you to it?
I think that I was just born a fairly curious person, and I think that having a sense of empathy is something that, I don't know, nature, nurture, whatever, that was just part of my early years that, people should care about each other, right? That's a, kind of foundational building block of life.
Yeah.
And I think that as a young person, I was also very anxious and quite insecure person. So I think that the idea that people might feel rejection or some sense of disconnection from the people, the world around them felt like something that mattered deeply to me. As I got older and just have had, people who've cared about me and coached me and, wanted to invest in my life, I think I've just been really grateful for those experiences. And if we have that sense of empathy for each other, then, there's just every person has an incredible capacity to make a difference in wherever they are. So I think that's kind of maybe the foundation, is just that people have really cared about me, made me feel welcome, and therefore, I want to make sure that other people have that same experience of welcome as well.
Yeah, interesting. You kind of want to pay it forward from what you received.
I think so. But I also think that, different things grab people's hearts in different ways. And I think maybe something that fills me with a sense of unease or, an injustice that I feel that I just feel strongly in, my heart is that, if people don't have a sense of agency and choice and genuine connection with the world around them, that just feels like the biggest injustice to me, that people feel ignored, that people feel excluded, that people are, shut out by the world around them, and that whether it's because they then don't actually have any opportunity or they feel like they don't, that just really grates something within me that I can't quite explain. So I think that, as just my life has gone on and opportunities have come up to be part of things that can help make people feel included or just recognize their dignity and their worth and their sense of, they have something valuable and, meaningful to contribute to the world around them, and that can be recognized. That just gets me really excited. So, I think that's kind of the journey. And then opportunities have just come up. You don't have to look too hard into the world around you to see that there is significant need, and we live in a fast-paced, very connected world, but a shadow side of that is that there are cohorts of people that are, every step the world takes to be more connected, they are a step further disconnected. So I think that, that those opportunities to just be part of different movements to, in even just really small ways to help reverse that or maybe bring people along the journey, or alternatively to remind us, those of us who are moving fast in this really connected world, to remind us that, whoa, okay, and this is not all about us. I think those are important, and I've been really glad to be a part of those.
Yeah. So in 2022, you wrote an article for the ABC titled, "I Live with 28 Other Men and My Wife." A pretty provocative title there, but can you tell us a bit about that and what that story is?
Lockdown hit in 2020, and everyone just had different experiences of that. And it feels kind of cliche to kind of go back and keep talking about this COVID experience.
I know, but at least we're calling it lockdown instead of, we get a lot of,
unprecedented event.
And that happened in 2020.
Yeah.
I think we all know what happened. Yeah. But
and my wife and I were living in a nice rental in Blackburn, eastern suburbs of Melbourne, leafy green area, wealthy, affluent area. And we had this series of experiences where we just were reminded, I think, of people in our community who were being ignored by what was happening. So there was an illegal rooming house not far from us that a group of people were living at, and
What is an illegal rooming house?
Sure.
Just for those who don't know.
Well, maybe the story will explain it. So in this particular house, it was just like a property, but the owner was a dealer, and he was dealing. He had a bunch of people who were living at the house who were his clients, and so he was charging them exorbitant rent, not obeying by kind of general tenancy laws around overcrowding, things like that. So it's not like a registered house or anything like that. It's just like a rental property.
Yeah.
But operating in a way with a large number of people living there, charging them all rent, not recognizing some of those kind of basic tenancy rights. And it was a crappy situation because he was dealing to them, and so there's this dependency on this person who managed the house. And we saw just like situation after situation of people who were clients or who were living in that house just having these like incredibly heartbreaking experiences. So one day we'd like gone for a walk and came back home, and there was a guy at the bus stop on the main road not far from us with all of his bags around him, and he was just in tears, and he needed an ambulance, like he was injured, and he just like didn't have a phone, didn't have and anyway. So that was one story. Another day, someone had like overnight been injured as well in a different way by someone else at the house, and had also some kind of experience where he was running from police, and so he'd clambered kind of over their fence and into our fence, and then jumped up onto our roof, and then like climbed over our back fence, and then eventually got picked up by the cops. And I don't really know too much more to the story other than that. I slept through the entire thing and found out about it in the morning. So it had a big effect on you. Yeah, that's right. But chatting to the neighbours in the morning just kind of got the sense of, what's going on here? And then a third time, someone had come out of the house, and I was working in our garage during lockdown, and heard this like moaning outside, and this guy was clearly high and not able to control his body, and he was not in a good state, and so we called an ambulance. And anyway, one by one, these experiences kind of happened, and I guess something was just triggering Michaela, my wife, and I thinking around all of this messaging around us, this public health campaigns around like stay safe, stay at home, stay safe, stay at home. Like, but you can't like, how do you do that when you don't have a home or when your home isn't a safe place to be? Yeah. So an opportunity then came up to move into a different kind of rooming house. So based in Kew, and the organisation that runs it provides long-term accommodation for people on low incomes, and so there's no end date on their lease. They're there for as short or as long as they need to be. There's a sense of community and connectedness. They've got meals provided 6 nights a week. There's tenancy support and mental health supports around them, wraparound support services that they can connect to, neighbours who connect in and care about them, and community groups that are involved. And sort of a part of this model for the organisation who runs this house is that there are live-in house managers, so people who are there just to be alongside the residents there, and not mental health care professionals, not doctors, not, like all those residents are engaging with those people on their day-to-day already anyway, but people who are just there because they want to be, and they care, and they can help create a sense of welcome. And I think...
And that's you?
That's myself and Michaela, my wife. So we kind of moved into this place, and pretty immediately, I think... just that experience living alongside these residents started to challenge maybe some of the ideas we'd had around our understanding of like what community or connection really means.
Right. What's an example of that?
Yeah. So these residents have, they're all on low incomes. That's why they can qualify to live there, right? But for many of them, that's, just a part of their story, and they have they've been imprisoned, or they've left family violence situations, or they've got acute psychiatric conditions, or they've got disabilities, or other factors in their life that are stopping them or preventing them from engaging fully in the world around them, or that are stopping other people because of their perception of them from engaging with them, right?
Yes.
And in lockdown, as like all of my mates and colleagues were anxious and overwhelmed and scared of the changes and like disconnected, we're in this house with 28 guys who, for them, the norm is that they're already disconnected from the world around them. They're already, they're already experiencing that sense of rejection and exclusion, right?
Yeah.
But the level of empathy and forgiveness and like capacity to have tolerance for one another amongst just those guys was like really extraordinary to me. And they, living alongside them was like inconvenient in the sense that, it takes up your time and attention, and things happen that you'd rather not deal with, like, you know,
As in
blocked
for you
toilets.
or for them?
Yeah,
For you.
probably both, right? Or like the fire alarm goes off and like it's chaos. You know? But regardless, it was like no matter what happened in the world around them, and as case numbers climbed and the world got more and more anxious, they just kept connecting with each other in the most meaningful, ordinary, non-remarkable ways. And that was really encouraging to me. And I'd previously maybe thought about connection as, you know, with like connecting with as many people as we can. You're like, we're so globally connected now, right? All the time, you know, our brains are, you know, engaging with people from all places. But the pace of life was just slower. And the residents just were, you know, way of life was just, I think I just gained a different appreciation for the importance of the non-remarkable everyday moments that matter when you spend time together.
Yeah, and it's amazing to hear about that situation that was then created, but then to keep, you know, through that story, you kept setting the context of the pandemic happening on top of that as well. It's such an already extraordinary situation, and then adding this, you know, global extraordinary situation around it that sort of prompted this.
And when writing the article, I think that if I was hoping to achieve something, it was that I think this is a moment when so many of us are reconsidering what it means to be connected to the world around us. And maybe there's a gentle invitation in that moment for us to not just like ride the wave of hyperconnectivity online, but to stop and pull back a moment and just remember that actually like our local neighborhoods really matter as well.
Yeah, we're so connected, but we're also not.
Right, yeah.
What is your day-to-day? You talked, you know, a bit about it here and there in illustrating, you know, what that situation is, but I don't know, day-to-day, what does that mean for you? What does that look like?
So at the house, Michaela and I live there, so we, you know, put out brekkie for the guys each morning and, you know, hang out.
We're talking about cereal, toast, the works.
Cereal, toast, the basics. You know, make sure that there's tea and coffee and sugar and milk and, you know, like nothing too remarkable. Respond if there's emergencies that pop up. So, you know, someone needs a hospital trip or, you know, whatever's happened there. Make sure that people feel welcome when they arrive. So, you know, you've been living on the streets for a while, you move into a place that's brand new, it's going to be scary and intimidating, and it makes a difference having someone who is just there to welcome you, and like you've got their phone number and you can ring the doorbell, you know, 10 meters from your own, and you know that they're going to be able to be there and just like help you figure whatever you need to figure out. Someone who can just like make the awkward introductions to other people easier and slightly less awkward. That's our gig, is to help build community, make sure the guys feel safe. And that's kind of our life at the house. Through the day, I work for an international NGO called Baptist World Aid. So we're an aid and development, like humanitarian response organisation, and I look after our partnerships team here in Australia. So fundraising, engaging Australians in advocacy, and ensuring, I guess, that, everyday people in Australia can align the way that they live in a way that resonates with what I think are fairly common values for us all. We don't always know how to respond.
And final question on this part for now, like, might sound a bit obvious, but like, is it stressful?
Living at the house?
Yeah.
All relationships have some sense of ease and some sense of stress, right? Like any relationship in your life is complex, right? So I think there are moments when it's busy or intense. Maybe I wouldn't say stressful, but I think just as much as the environment is unique in it can be heavy sense, it's also incredibly meaningful. And I learn so much from our residents, probably much more than they learn from me. And I think it's it's like really genuinely a joy to live there.
Yeah. That's so good to hear. You studied economics at Deakin, which sounds a little different to the kind of, you know, the work that we're talking about, you know, for the community and development work that you do now. So I guess help us connect the dots. What is the connection there?
Yeah. I studied economics, I think, because I'm a curious person, and I wanted to understand more about how the world worked. That might sound kind of silly, like everyone knows how the world works, but actually, like, there are entire systems that we engage with every day that we just take for granted and we don't necessarily put too much thought to. And even when it comes to, like those systems, sometimes we see that they're imperfect and we're like, throw them out, change the system, and like that's really easy to say. But the reality is, like, those systems have, just as much as they're there maybe like in a broken sense, those systems also lead to like economic dignity and a high quality of life for like most people on the planet. So I think, it can be a bit simplistic for us to just blindly advocate sometimes for things when we don't understand the nuances of the way a system works. So I think that I was curious about having like more language and maybe more credibility, but really just like a peace within my own self about knowing that when I'm talking about something I care about, I can talk about that from a place of being informed rather than just feeling like there was something that I was missing underneath that. So yeah, that's kind of why economics. Also, it was a slight surprise. I started a commerce degree, did my first economics subject, and was like, "Well, this is really fun." I didn't think I'd like that.
Interesting, really fun.
Yeah, well,
probably not every day that
I thought it's fun. Yeah.
Well, I guess how has it shaped your worldview and your understanding of how all these things are connected? And you've talked about it a little bit there. Can you go into how it's made you a more effective advocate?
Yeah, I think sometimes. Oh man, maybe in so many different ways. I think it's partly the like learned content, right? Like, sure, that's important, but I actually think just the processes of thinking were more impactful. Like, I think doing my economics degree with Deakin led to me being a more intelligently curious person, and there are plenty of blind spots, but I think that I have systems of thinking now that make me a more effective learner in my life. And, the world around us is constantly changing, right? Even, it's been a few years since I studied and our economic situation now is different from what it was 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And it will be different again in 5 years from now. But the ability to look at and map out an economy and the way that the people within that economy operate, not just in their like practices and buying behaviors, but in like their mindsets and the way we think and the stories we tell ourselves that influence our behaviors. I think that's hugely valuable. So I think that's actually the biggest learning from me is just like systems and ways of thinking. And you see different people do that in different ways. But I think that's the benefit, right? Is you watch and observe different people challenging questions and challenging each other and disagreeing, and that's really rewarding. And
so in how it's made you a more effective advocate, is it giving you the sort of language or the right sort of way to look at what change will have impact? Yeah,
I think so. I mean, am I an effective advocate? Maybe, hopefully. But
that's the real question.
But yeah, I think I'm maybe more cautious about jumping on a bandwagon on a policy that I think needs changing, and more curious about what are the implications of a change. Because sometimes you want to change a policy and the obvious change actually doesn't lead to the outcome that you want it to, right?
Yes.
There's policy, and then there's like how that policy plays out in practice as people engage with it, or as, people enforce it, or as, so you can change the rules of the game of life that people play in, but those rules are not necessarily straightforward, and people are not just rational beings that follow rational, consequences. We're informed by emotion and perception and greed and good values as well. And so, there's so many different influences there. So I think, economics degree just maybe gave me a foundation of wanting to understand that more. And I think that makes anyone a more effective advocate.
And it's putting you on the spot a little bit, but like, is there anything in your work that you've found, like through this better understanding of, from an economic perspective, of something that people might not be fully conscious of, but that actually does have a lot more impact on, on the kind of work that you do on the community level from the economic level?
Maybe. So I think there's different like justifications for why something might be a good policy. And actually we were just chatting about this before the podcast with some of the team is, so like obviously I work in community housing or live in, community housing.
Yeah.
And, we can, as a society, have these attitudes around how much that costs the taxpayer or, like what's the cost to society for, why should we subsidize housing for a group of people? They should just work harder, right? But, even if you leave all moral arguments aside or ethical considerations, and if you have zero care at all about like how people end up, the reality is when you don't house people in safe environments, you lead to much greater incidences of hospitalizations. People are, living in the psych ward, people in overcrowded scenarios, more emergency department presentations, more people imprisoned. All of these things are more expensive than just housing someone in safe housing and putting around some basic supports. So I think, you can do the maths on that. Like the amount that even we in Victoria spend on imprisoning people. I know so many people just from a personal experience of living with the guys who have bounced between prisons and streets and unsafe houses and then prisons and then streets and unsafe houses and then found dependencies on substance use and find themselves in the emergency department every few weeks. And, like you see these patterns of people's lives that just basic safe housing prevents. And then I've also seen the impact of that basic safe housing preventing that. And so then you can do the maths and say, okay, well, surely this is a better outcome. Economically, like it's cheaper for us as a society, right? But also like for quality of life, not only for them, but for everyone in the community. So I think, sometimes what we think is a cost is actually far less expensive than the reactive approach that we tend to take in our policy decisions now. I think that's
that sort of perception versus the actual reality on the ground. How has what you studied at Deakin empowered you in your career?
Yeah, I mean, I work in international aid and development, right? So, our economy is like so wrapped up in people's experiences of poverty. I think this is the thing around those systems are really important, but they also don't work for everyone. Like our systems have enabled millions of people to lift themselves out of poverty over the course of the last, 50 years, say. But there are still broken elements. We have enough food production in the world to feed everyone. We produce way more clothes as a whole society than we need, but there are still people who can't access these basic things. So there's like a distribution inequity. And I think that that when you consider some of these like realities of wealth and non-wealth or of like having and not having, understanding like the way that our systems work allows you to think about more informed responses to what's going to be an effective solution on the ground. It's maybe one thought like kind of related to the economic side, but my minor was in global studies, and as part of that global studies, I remember doing like sociology units, and I feel like those with Deakin also gave me a deeper appreciation for wanting to understand the way that people think and like what are the forces and the worldviews around the way, the stories we tell ourselves, right? That change our behaviors. So, working with a community overseas, like you can take an approach and say, well, okay, if there's a distribution inequity, we could just give these things, right? Provide X, Y, and Z. And you might assume that that's going to lead to a long-term solution for that community. But it's not always the case, because actually good development practice means working with people, and it's not just the tangible assets they have. Their sense of self and sense of worth and their understanding of their own capacity and their desire to be leaders within their community and what they perceive as the opportunities for them, or what they perceive to be safe or not safe, or risky or not risky, is so much, the social assets, right? Is so much of seeing a community being able to experience like a deeper fullness of life. So I think, there's the economic side, but economics is really about people. And so, I think combined with that sociology, I found that fascinating at Deakin, like that mixed together. And find that I still all the time feel like I'm thinking about this interesting mix of, money and assets, and what are the economics, and then how are people interacting with the systems that they engage with.
Totally, very interconnected. Not one or the other. They all go together. Tell us a little bit more about your time at Deakin. Did you study online or on campus?
I'm a cloud baby. So so actually I started my degree elsewhere. Did a year. paused for a while to start full-time work as some opportunities came up, and then decided I wanted to go back and finish my commerce degree. And so I'd only done a couple of commerce subjects at that point, and Deakin was like, it was the university that had the flexibility to allow me to study full-time online while working full-time. So it was probably just a pragmatic decision. I think Deakin's cloud setup was just far more advanced, even at that stage, kind of pre-multiple years of lockdown and everything going online, that made it work well for me. But then also because my first year back at Deakin was 2020, so every university ended up going online. I think the infrastructure was already there from Deakin to make it like there was no change in what my experience was going to be, whether there was a lockdown or no lockdown. So
that's really good to hear. Any highlights of your degree? Any favorite units or lecturers that you want to name or throw under the bus?
No one's going under the bus. You're safe. I mentioned my sociology unit earlier. Anna Halifoff was one of my lecturers for that unit, and I found her a really curious person, as in she herself is a very curious person. And I really appreciated learning from her the way that she understands worldviews. And maybe a learning that I maybe took away from that unit is, I mean, she's done a lot of research into spirituality and religion and the way that informs people's worldviews. And maybe in a way that's different to what we in kind of like secular Australia tend to think about. Like we tend to, our policy decisions in education and things like that, I think sometimes err towards seeing religion or spirituality as a private sphere thing that's maybe like a cultural practice that you can practice in your family or in your community or in your religious institution, whatever that looks like. And then you can bring a secular self into the world around you. I think I already knew that not to be true before starting at Deakin, but I think her research around even Australians' responses to the idea of spirituality is interesting. And in kind of various writing or teaching, she's helped to make an argument to say that, well, actually, most Australians, and particularly young people, have some level of spirituality in their life. That's different for everyone, and it's not like a saying they should view this or they should view that, but just at a factual basis. Like most people believe that there's some element of spirituality to themselves.
Right.
And so that informs, the way that we show up and operate in our world, and not just at home, but like in every area of our society. Broadly around the world, that is overwhelmingly true as well. Like most people around the world are religious in some context, in different faiths, different expressions of that.
Yeah.
And that faith or those religious practices and beliefs like don't just shape certain traditions or behaviors, they shape their entire way of viewing their interactions with humanity around them, their decision making, what they value, how they work, right?
Values, morals.
Absolutely. At a really deep level. And you can't just separate that from them showing up in the world, right? That's not how that works, regardless of whether you want it to or not. And so in Australia, I think our religious education, like our understanding of people's deep worldviews maybe is a bit lacking compared to what it could be. Around, if we don't understand the ways in which people's faiths and spirituality like shapes the way they engage in the world around them, then we fail to actually understand them as like full people. And then the decisions that they make and what they value and the behaviors they display won't make sense to us. And I think that leads to tension and conflict. Whereas I think that the more deeply we can understand and appreciate one another, even if we disagree, we can like walk the brain paths, walk the learning journey that they're going on and gain a different appreciation and find some common ground. So anyway, shout out to Anna.
Yeah, shout out to Anna. And beyond, the units and lecturers, I mean, you started studying during the pandemic or you were studying during the pandemic. Did you make connections?
Yeah, surprisingly. I say surprisingly, not because it's hard to make friends, but I think I made an assumption studying online that you'd be pretty disconnected from other people.
Yeah, I think that's a bit of a, widespread assumption.
Yeah. But I actually found like the systems were really well set up, and the way that even like our classes and workshops and tutes and things just worked at a practical level meant, we made friends. So we had like a study group of a few people that like formed, from a couple of different classes, and we connected, and we'd just like Zoom and like hang out and study or whatever and play games and muck around. And it was nice to like walk that journey with other people who were also doing the same thing. Easier to make friends online than you might think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really good to hear. And you were working while you were studying, weren't you?
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about that experience. How did you sort of balance that?
Yeah. I don't even know. I know that's a bad answer. That's an unhelpful answer.
Yeah. You probably just did it,
But
right?
yeah, you just do it. I think lockdown kind of made it easier in some ways. Like, what else was I going to do with my time, right? I wasn't going anywhere.
Yeah, true.
But no, I think that you have to work hard, be organized, set good boundaries, look after your health. But it's also just takes some hard work, and that's okay too. I also think that they can have good flexibility. The trimester model was nice. Like, I think that the shorter period of time that's a bit more intense allows you to then take a break a little more often as you go through each trimester. It also lets you squish more subjects into a year. So, I just overloaded, and then you do all 3 trimesters and you finish everything earlier, which I think when you're working full time, like, you're not studying just to finish a degree, you're studying because you want to learn something that's going to influence your career or change the way that you engage in the world, right? So I think I think a value that I have is like I want to be a good learner in life, and I'm curious. So I wanted to kind of soak up that experience and then be able to apply it sooner rather than later.
You saw the value of getting that done.
Yeah, I think
getting
so.
those subjects done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it worked quite well, actually, work full time. I also had a flexible job, which was helpful. Like if I needed to shift things around, I could. But again, the cloud kind of model worked well. Like, even if we hadn't been in COVID lockdowns, like I wouldn't have needed to leave work in order to get to a lecture at a certain time. Like, I can engage online afterwards and structure my week in the way that I need to.
Yeah.
So I think that flexibility was helpful.
Yeah. You have a documentary out at the moment. And not only is it, out, it's on SBS at the moment, but it's also won Best Documentary and Best Emerging Director at the Melbourne Documentary Film Festival in 2025. It earned gold in cinematography as well at the Australian Cinematographers Society Awards. It's called Love in the Walls. Tell us a bit about it.
I talked a little about that changing sense of like connection for me in maybe just my learning living with the residents at home. A reality for many of our residents is that they do experience rejection from the society around them. And, we all have perceptions of the people in the world around us. And sometimes those perceptions are accurate, sometimes they're not, but they're rarely a full perception of the people that we engage with. So as we kind of embarked on this documentary project, we wanted to let some stories speak for themselves and allow some of the residents to share some of like their experience. Sometimes, like if you're in like a marketing film or like even documentaries, people want to see a neat before and after, like this person was homeless and they came here and now everything's stable and their life is awesome. And the reality is that that's just not how life works so much of the time. Our residents live complex, meaningful, challenging lives, and they engage in a whole web of relationships in the community around them. And not only do they engage in those relationships, they also bring, I think, immense value to those relationships and to our society as a whole. So I guess we wanted to showcase some of those stories, those connections, some of the value they bring, and also just invite people in the world who are often moving so fast and going so quickly, hurrying from thing to thing to thing, often living in parallel with these people who, are experiencing great difficulty and challenge, but bringing great value. And the two sometimes just don't meet, except for when you walk past someone sitting on top of cardboard out the front of Coles, right? So like, who are these people, and like, what are their stories, and what do they bring to the world that's really valuable, and how can we learn from them and support them well, and how can we understand the complexity of their experience without presuming what a solution must be for them. That was kind of the idea behind this documentary. The title, Love in the Walls, came from a quote from one of my colleagues, Amanda. She's our CEO. And she was saying that, you know, over the years of like these houses existing, that people have tried to like quantify and document and research and like, you know, explain like why is this model of housing so successful for this cohort of people who really struggle to maintain tenancies in so many other types of environments. And she said, well, like in some ways, like we know answers and we have data and stuff, but at the end of the day, like there's also just this very human thing, which is that there's love. It's like there's love in the walls. And that was just a really beautiful moment.
Yeah.
So that's what the documentary is about.
And how did the documentary itself come about, and what was your involvement in that?
I wanted to film 3 really short 2 to 3 minute clips that we could show to community groups to explain like what is this housing and how can people get involved in supporting people in their community who might be experiencing disadvantage.
Right.
And then I was at a 30th with the guy who became the director and cinematographer, Sam, and we were just like chatting and we're like, wouldn't it be fun to film a documentary and tell like bigger stories and deeper stories? And so then we did. And the process was super, I mean, I've never filmed a documentary before, but the process was really beautiful, largely because of Sam. So he came and spent time at our house and in the other houses of this organization for about 6 months with no camera.
Wow.
And just like spent time getting to know the residents and really just wanting to understand them as people and also like book in a genuine relationship with them. And then, you know, they knew that he wanted to film a documentary, but then, you know, slowly brought out his camera at moments that they were happy to invite him and the camera into.
So he gained their trust.
Yeah, and not just for the sake of the documentary, but like in a sense of allowing people to share the part of their world that they wanted to share if they were given the opportunity to. And I think this is what I really love about the film as I watch it is you hear like there's no voiceover, there's no narrator in the film,
tying it all together in some neat bow.
You just exist in these moments with these residents, and some of them are articulate, and some of them are sad, and some of them are hopeful, and some of them are melancholy, and some of them are poetic, and some of them are frenetic, you know. But you just get to experience a moment with them and hear their story in the way that they would like to share it. And I think that grows our appreciation of them as real people. So anyway, then Sam spent a bunch of time filming and still hanging out, and now he still hangs out but isn't filming. So
that's nice to hear.
Yeah.
He didn't pack up his camera once it was done.
I'm gone.
All right, thanks. Got it.
Yeah.
Cut.
Yeah, there's no cut on real relationships in life, right?
Yeah.
Or ideally, you know, there's no cut. So yeah, it's a beautiful piece of work. It's kind of 60 minutes of just sitting and being with our residents. And it feels a little bit like what my experience is like as a house manager with the residents. Like the focus is on the residents, but I think, yeah, you sit with people in normal moments of life and you hear their stories unravel over time and you live their stories with them. So I think it's like a glimpse into
a true window into someone's
I think it's really
experience.
Beautiful. Yeah.
And, you know, as I mentioned, it's won some awards. It's going to be on SBS. I think, well, as we film this, I think it's on maybe now or very, very soon. SBS On Demand. Did you foresee any of that happening when you kind of, you know, started this project?
We just wanted to make a beautiful piece of storytelling, I think. And so it feels like every kind of moment that it gets played or shown or aired somewhere just feels like a cool bonus. We also produced it for like dirt cheap. So I'm also really proud.
FYI.
I'm also really proud of that people really enjoy engaging with it and find it meaningful and find it beautiful, like visually beautiful as well. And the audio is beautiful and I think it's just a labor of love for a number of people. I think it's cool that it's going on SBS and hopefully some people will watch it. Maybe what's even more meaningful is I've been watching this like round of screenings in like community groups and churches and other housing organisations, and like Homes Victoria did a screening for all their staff, and hearing the feedback from people from those screenings or doing like Q&As in those screenings, it's been beautiful to see how the stories are landing in ways that feel real.
And have the subjects of the documentary from your housing like watched it?
Yeah, they have.
What do they think?
Yeah, they love it. It was actually it's been. I think they're proud of themselves.
Good.
And for some of them, they don't care. Like, and that's fine too.
That's also good.
And what I mean by that is like they still keep living their normal day-to-day lives, right? Like that film doesn't change.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the point of the film is like their life is complex and messy and it just keeps going, right? The other thing I think that was interesting about the documentary is in the sort of year that Sam was filming, it was just a really hard year for our residents in the houses, and we had like it's every now and then someone passes away, from one of the houses, and it's like a health issue like that has finally come to fruition, or it's age, or it's and sometimes more rarely, but still sometimes it can be substance related as well. Across this year, we had just a string of deaths of people. It was like just after lockdowns had eased and support services were starting to come back in. And I think there was this collective sense of like heaviness and weight out of that season. And it's like that was being released for the world as a whole. But there was almost like there's this like compounding trauma of this like increased isolation and frustration and disconnection for the residents from the world around them. And so, and it just kind of struck at the same time as like a group of deaths for like all different kind of health-related reasons. And that just sucked. That was just hard for everyone. And so we were kind of filming as like just one by one, these people just passed away for different reasons. And so I think there's also something in the documentary that is a bit somber or morose, or like there's a sense of mourning in moments, but then also a sense of, and yet life goes on. And the next day you still get up and eat and talk to people and work if you can, or garden, or do whatever you do, right? So I think it felt like an intimate moment for the documentary to sit in.
Yeah, truly.
Across that year.
Very powerful. Let's talk about the future. I mean, the state of the world can be challenging. I mean, we're, filming this in a week where, there's a sort of a new war has broken out.
Yeah.
It's easy to feel powerless. How did you get started in advocacy yourself and wanting to do something about that?
Yeah. Maybe unintentionally. I think that great advocacy is born of experience and proximity and curiosity. For example, in housing, Michaela and I moved in, and like the goalpost wasn't to change a policy or to, like there was no like outcome in mind there other than like being. But then I think as you spend time with people and think deeply on issues that matter, you naturally can become an advocate just by living in a way that's more aligned with your values and what you want to see change. So
it's an interesting way to look at that.
Yeah. So I think that over time, as we spent time with the residents, like there were just opportunities come up here and there to speak into something that you are knowledgeable about and care about, and also opportunities to allow those residents to speak to things that they care about as well. So now, that can look like engaging in policy or working with MPs or consultation with housing providers or engaging with different levels of government on stuff. Or with Baptist World Aid, it's advocacy is different. It's around ethical supply chains for the clothing that we wear, and eliminating modern day slavery in those supply chains, and protecting the environment from the harms of mass production and waste, or around Australia maintaining its foreign aid budget. It's very low compared to even some of its historic levels under previous governments, or, being conscious of humanitarian visa numbers and families who haven't been able to connect, who have fled from Myanmar after the coup there in 2021. And I think now, as I learn more about these issues in the world around us, I am trying, as I think we all are, to live in ways that align with what we learn and what our values are. So, I think the advocacy has come naturally out of that, but also I'm passionate that when things are unjust, that we have a responsibility and an opportunity to be part of changing them.
You talked a little bit about it there, which I think is a really interesting perspective of, what advocacy can look like. I think most people would probably assume that it's a very, very active, go do something, go talk to someone, go to government, go to your MP, make a difference. But, potentially it's just living your values and doing something a bit more demonstrable. But, what advice do you have for young people who are wanting to take that first step into advocacy and do something about something in some way?
I think I said earlier that I think good advocacy comes from proximity is really important. So I think listening and learning is just really important. But advocacy can't stop there. You have to then demonstrate with your life what you are learning. And then I think that's really important before trying to take that message further. Doesn't mean you need to perfect everything. You never will. Like trying is important, right?
Yeah.
Perfection isn't the goal, right? Change is. So listen well, find people who are different than you and disagree with you and understand them and where they're coming from instead of pushing them down for disagreeing. I think that's important. One of my favorite quotes is a paraphrase of a section of the book of 1 Corinthians, and it says I could talk in all the world's many languages or in the tongues of angels, but if I don't speak with love, then I am nothing more than a clanging cymbal, right? I really like that kind of sentiment that if we don't have a genuine sense of, we can advocate from a place of fear, we can advocate from a sense of anger. Neither is necessarily inherently bad things, but I think if we want to bring people along the journey, then we need to have a genuine love for one another. So, love people.
Good advice. And looking back on your journey, what role did higher education have in, what you've been able to do?
As connected as we are, we're also more we walk inside our own bubbles of knowledge more and more, and selectively so as well. We, how many times have you seen a post on your, social media feeds where someone's unfriend me if you don't believe this, or if you disagree with me, I don't want to be friends with you. And fair enough, so be it. People can pick and choose who they engage with, and, sure, maybe don't engage too deeply with people who aren't safe to be around. But at the end of the day, people are people, and we need to understand one another and learn from one another if we want to get anywhere, right? We don't exist in a vacuum, and you can't just selectively live your entire life in a vacuum because it's not productive. It's not, you might see change and, or feel really aligned with a small group of people or a large group of people. But I think the goalpost is that we have a greater sense of social peace. It's not just about internal peace. It's about a sense of communal well-being, right? Or at least I think that's a worthy goal. And I think most of us want that, whether we think that's achievable or not. So I think that higher education space, any place where you go into the contest of ideas and can listen well and challenge what you believe and why you believe it, is good.
Yeah.
And I think university is a great place to do that. I think Deakin's a good place to do that.
We'll cut there. Thanks. And just finally, you've spoken a bit about it in that answer, but just broadly, how important is it for people to give back?
I think people have their public life, it's the life that people see. And then you've got your private life, which is you've got a close group of friends or family or people who know you at that deeper level. And then you have your secret life, which is the parts of you that it's where your deeper insecurities or hopes live, right? That maybe you share with someone, but some of it's just still forming in your own heart and mind. I think when we live in a way where the values in our lived experience in the public life don't align that well with the values in our secret life, I think we feel tension. And I think that's where we feel anxiousness and stress and overwhelm, and something doesn't quite sit right and I can't quite explain it. But giving, like in any sense, like living generously and humbly, I think is integral to being able to align those sense of like the inner life, that secret life, the what you hope and what you dream of and what you are worried about where you don't speak to anyone, and also the public you, the part that people see and know and engage with. So I think, advocating well, living generously, being kind to one another, trying, showing up. I think these are integral to us feeling a sense of settledness as human beings, but then also to bringing that settledness or that peace in the holistic word to the community around us.
Well said. Got some quick fire questions to wrap up. We're nearly at the end here. So we're recording this just before Love in the Walls goes live on SBS. I guess, would you do another one of these? Is there another sort of bit of storytelling that you would do to sort of support this, this cause and what the difference you want to make in the world? Yeah,
these stories remind us to be human, and I think that's a great thing. I think we'd do another one. The next one I'd love to do is something around those supply chains. So Baptist World Aid surveys the data from Australia's biggest fashion brands, around 500 of them, and then assesses them and gives them a score out of 100 on how well they protect people in their supply chains.
Oh boy.
We don't score super well across the board, but we can do better, and we have seen better. But I think it would be interesting to trace some of those journeys on film.
Yeah, definitely.
So if someone wants to bankroll that, then
call out.
Please do.
Yeah, please
give me a call.
Right in. Between work and volunteering, you deal with some heavy stuff. So what do you do to take care of yourself?
I cook. I run. I sleep. I hang out with friends. All the normal things. I don't know. I journal. Inconsistently, but I should do more. And spend time with people you love. I don't know. All the normal things that people do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you cook a delicious breakfast from the sounds of it, of the conversation.
Breakfast is my favorite meal of the day. So.
And finally, what's next for you?
I love where I am. Baptist World Aid is an amazing organization to work for because the cause is deeply aligned, but also like I've never worked with such like a number of incredibly high caliber, passionate, thoughtful people. And I just feel like the greatest joy working with my team there. So I think I'll be there for a while. And we love where we live. So I feel like maybe there was a time when I was younger where I was always thinking like 5-year horizon, 10-year horizon, like where am I going? What's the plan? I don't think I have a plan anymore, but I'm really enjoying being where I am. Although I'm really motivated by growth. Like I love that we get to see things move forward. So at Baptist World Aid, like we want to make a bigger impact in the world, and we want to see more communities able to lift themselves out of poverty, and we want to see better supply chain practices, and we want to see changes to sanctions and situation for people in Myanmar. And I think what's next is continuing along the path, hopefully learning and having fun while doing it.
Yeah, nice. Well, Jayden Battey, thank you so much for coming on Stories of Wonder.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
That's it for this episode of Stories of Wonder. If you enjoyed it, you can like and subscribe. You can also join the conversation by leaving a comment below. You can learn more about this story through the links in the description. And for more conversations like this, check out the full series on YouTube or on your favorite podcasting platform. See you next time.